In a world, there are stories of wicked mothers-in-law and sisters-in-law who torment their daughters-in-law. But the opposite can happen too. Listen to our story of how a strong-willed daughter-in-law broke our family and how we rebuilt it. My name is Freya. I'm 25 years old. Just the other day, I married Knox, who is 3 years older than me at work, and I am on top of the world. When I left the house I had lived in for many years, my grandmother said, "I'll be lonely here too, but Freya, live happily. If anything happens, you can always come back." She sent me off with those words. My parents divorced when I was in 8th grade and my brother Elliot was in 12th grade. We weren't at an age where we absolutely needed a mother, and since Elliot and I were both preparing for exams and for financial reasons, we children lived with our father. Our grandmother, my father's mother, took care of us, preparing meals and cleaning. The reason for the divorce was my father's infidelity. My grandmother often said, "I really feel sorry for your mother. My son isn't a bad person, but he's always had a weakness for women. Or rather, he's too timid to refuse an invitation." He was a kind and good father to us siblings, but marital relationships and relationships between men and women are different matters. My grandmother was a gentle and hard-working person. I have never seen her take a break. Whenever she had a free moment, she would start cleaning or knitting, her hobby. Elliot and I received many sweaters and scarves knitted by her. Even though they were divorced, we often met with our mother for meals or shopping, so we didn't feel particularly lonely. I think my mother really loved my father. Even after they separated, she often worried about him. That's probably why she couldn't forgive his infidelity. I remember my mother crying throughout the funeral when my father suddenly died of a stroke 6 years ago. When my father died, my mother had already remarried, so living with her was not an option for us siblings. We couldn't leave our grandmother alone in this big house, and Elliot agreed. Our mother said she would help us in any way if something happened. Then I got married and moved out, leaving my grandmother and Elliot alone in the old, too large house. It's only a 15-minute drive from our new home, so I'll visit often. I want to get grandma's cooking. I really thought so and intended to do so, but a year after I moved out, Elliot got married. That was the beginning of everything. Elliot, 29, had impregnated a woman 4 years older. I was surprised by the words of Diana, who would become my sister-in-law when we first met. "I am having a child, so I made him take responsibility and marry me. I really didn't want to get married." I think the responsibility lies with both adults. If you don't want to get married, then use contraception, I thought to myself, but didn't say it out loud. To be honest, my impression of Diana was quite bad. She has a beautiful face, but I think her bad personality shows on her face. Despite saying she didn't want to get married, both the wedding and reception were quite lavish. I think Elliot must have struggled a lot. There must have been financial help from my grandmother. Elliot, perhaps like our father, is kind-hearted but weak-willed. It was clear that he was already under the thumb of his older wife. The first time I visited my grandmother's house after Elliot's wedding, Diana said to me, "You're married now, right? You shouldn't be coming back here so often. Be careful." Such an arrogant attitude right off the bat. I was annoyed to comply with Diana's wishes, but naturally my visit to my grandmother's house became less frequent. I did rush to congratulate them when the baby was born, but I couldn't help but worry about my grandmother's condition. She had lost a lot of weight. "Grandma, are you okay? You have lost some weight, haven't you? Are you feeling ill?" When I asked, my grandmother laughed and said, "I'm fine. At my age, being heavy is hard on the knees, so losing a little weight is just right." She says she's not feeling bad, but my grandmother will be 77 next month. As a granddaughter who adores her, I can't help but worry. "Grandma, your birthday is next month. We have to celebrate." When I said that, she replied, No, it's fine. My great-grandchild was just born, so I'm not in the mood for that." Always so modest. "Why don't we celebrate the baby and your birthday together?" I thought it was a great idea, but my grandmother firmly declined. "Really? Don't worry about me. Just celebrate the baby." I tried to talk to Elliot and Diana directly, but Diana shot me down. "It's bad luck to celebrate an old person with little time left and a newborn baby together. Besides, she said she doesn't need it, right? There's no need to force it." What's with her? taking advantage of Grandma's kindness and saying whatever she wants, saying little time left outright. I was furious and vented my anger to Knox. Come on, Freya, I understand why you're angry, but if Grandma asks for help, we can be there for her. I'll help too when that time comes. Knox's words were comforting, but I have never seen my grandmother complain or show weakness. That's why I am worried. The following year, I became pregnant. I tried to talk to Elliot and Diana directly, but Diana dismissed me again. Giving birth is really hard. It's very painful and agonizing. Are you sure you'll be okay, Freya? Talking down to me about something every woman knows, it was incredibly irritating. I was also concerned that Elliot's child, who was almost 2, was clinging to my grandmother. Even when Diana called, the child hid behind my grandmother and wouldn't go to its mother. Oh dear, how unlovable. She's completely tamed her great-grandchild, Diana said, looking displeased. What an awful thing to say. I know from Elliot that Diana returned to full-time work 2 months after giving birth. During those 2 months of maternity leave, she apparently dumped most of the housework and childcare on my grandmother. Elliot told her many times not to leave the child rearing to our grandmother, but she wouldn't listen. Isn't the reason the child doesn't come to you because you have left all the childcare to Grandma? Of course, the child will become attached to the person who's always there and takes care of them. When I said that, Diana replied, You know, I never wanted children or even to get married. I have no intention of quitting my job, and I'm needed at my company. You might not understand that. Diana's way of speaking really gets under my skin every time. I'm sure she's under a witch's curse. If she accidentally utters a kind word, the curse will make her face swell to twice its size. That's the only way I can make sense of her. On my way home, I was called over by Rosie from my house across the street. Rosie and I have known each other since I was a child. She's a bit of a gossip, but a good-natured and friendly person. During a neighborhood chat, Rosie and her friends asked Diana, who was returning from work, You're already back at work after just having a baby? Are you feeling okay? Diana replied that her daughter had been taken by her grandmother and she was being forced to work. Of course, I completely denied that, and Rosie, who has known my grandmother even longer than I have, didn't believe Diana's words either. She probably called me over because she was worried, not believing Diana. If we leave Diana alone, there's no telling what lies she will spread about the neighborhood. I was thinking that I needed to have a serious talk with Elliot about Diana when all of a sudden, my grandmother collapsed. She fell while pulling weeds in the garden and was taken away in an ambulance. It happened during a break in the June rainy season. The lady across the street called the ambulance. Diana couldn't be reached and Elliot was stuck in a meeting, so they contacted me. Fortunately, it was just mild heat stroke. My grandmother had regained consciousness by the time I arrived. Grandma, are you okay? I called out, and my grandmother, more concerned about her great-granddaughter, said, Oh, Freya, what about the baby? She should be napping in the room visible from the garden. It would be painful if she woke up alone. Apparently, my grandmother had been pulling weeds while checking on her great-granddaughter's nap. You should have let Elliot do the weeding. You shouldn't overdo it, Grandma. Never mind that. Hurry home and check on her. If she's awake and crying, give her the rabbit stuffed animal. That usually stops her crying. She urged me on. My grandmother was kept in the hospital for a day to be safe given her age. I rushed to my grandmother's house and found my niece still sound asleep in the room facing the garden. When I returned to the hospital with my niece, my grandmother was asleep. My niece, who seemed a little frightened by the hospital atmosphere, trotted over to my grandmother and asked, Nana, Nana, are you okay? Does your tummy hurt? My grandmother woke up and stroked her head. Oh, good. Nana is fine, Freya. I'm so sorry to bother you, especially with a baby in your belly. Even at this time, my grandmother was worried about my niece and me. Hey, Grandma, the lady across the street told me that Diana is telling people in the neighborhood that she has been forced to work and that you have taken her daughter. Aren't you upset being bossed around by someone like that and even lied about? I'm furious. It makes me so angry. I was trying to keep my voice down because we were in a hospital room, but tears started to flow and I couldn't stop them. My grandmother silently stroked my head. Yes, I want to leave that house. Then she whispered, It was the first time I had ever heard my grandmother's voice of weakness. Exactly, Grandma. You don't have to work for someone like Diana. Let's live together at my place. I truly felt that way, but my grandmother said, "Thank you, Freya, but I can't. What would happen to this child if I were gone?" She said this while stroking the head of her great-granddaughter who was standing beside the bed looking puzzled. They'll figure it out. They are her parents after all. Just then Elliot, the child's father, arrived after leaving work early. "Grandma, are you okay? I told you I would do the weeding on my next day off." From what Elliot said, it seemed that Diana had ordered my grandmother to do the weeding. How far is she willing to exploit our grandmother? I know it's pointless to say anything, but I couldn't keep quiet. According to Elliot, he never thought she was so selfish when they were dating. I have heard of husbands changing after marriage, but it seems wives can change too. I always thought that a husband would become more arrogant over the years. But there are people like Diana. What Elliot told me was beyond my imagination. My grandmother was treated like Diana's slave. Elliot tried to warn and scold her, but she didn't care, and all Elliot could do was help his grandmother. It's shameful for Elliot, but he's always been a kind person, like his grandmother and father. I never want my grandmother to go back to that house. The dream I had that night was the worst. My grandmother, Elliot, and I were desperately rowing oars under a violently rocking ship. If we rested our hands, a whip would come flying. Diana was the one wielding the whip. When my grandmother is discharged tomorrow, I told Elliot she should come to my place for emergency shelter. It's the weekend and both Elliot and Diana are off work. They'll be fine without grandmother. I want her to rest and think about the future. Elliot seemed resolved, saying, "I love my daughter, but I think this marriage was a mistake. I'll take responsibility." He said that and left with his daughter. When my discharged grandmother stepped into my small 2DK apartment, she laughed and said, "Oh my, it's quite cozy. Cleaning will be easy." She had lived in that big old house for many years. It's not surprising she felt that way. When I moved out of that house and started living here, I was shocked by the smallness too. Thanks to that, I was teased as the young lady by Knox for a while. No matter how much I told my grandmother to rest, she kept working, cleaning the water areas and cooking for my husband. While relaxing with after-dinner coffee, Elliot called. His daughter was throwing a tantrum and wouldn't take a shower. "She always wants her grandma to bathe her. She says she won't go in without Bertie." "What's Bertie?" he said, but I couldn't stand being bothered with such things. "What's her mother doing?" When I asked, I was surprised to hear that she had gone on an overnight trip with friends since morning. My grandmother guessed from the conversation that Bertie was a duck toy and it was on the shelf in the dressing room. Traveling when the grandmother had collapsed? Leaving a young daughter to travel even if it was pre-booked, I understood that Diana was completely unreliable in childcare. "Elliot, I'm coming over tomorrow. I can't stand it anymore. She's the worst as both a mother and a wife. Elliot, you need to get it together too." When I said that, Elliot seemed to have made up his mind. "Okay, I think she'll be back after 7 in the evening." He said that and hung up. That's a relief. Bertie must be relieved too. I called my mother. I had reported about Diana a few times, but my mother never thought it would be this bad. Elliot is just like his father. He can't take a strong stance against women, my mother said with a sigh, promising to support us fully. The next day when Diana returned from her trip, she was met by Elliot, me, his sister-in-law, our grandmother, and not just us but also Knox, our mother, and her new husband. A total of 6 people. Our niece was put to bed by our grandmother. "Oh, what? Why are there so many people? Why are there people I don't know? Who are you?" Diana said to my mother and her new husband. "They are Elliot's and my mother. The man next to her is her new husband." When I said that, she replied, "Oh, the one who left this house and her child? Why are you here now and what do you want?" With that one sentence, I think Diana completely turned my mother against her. I called them. My mother's husband is a lawyer. Diana looked a little startled when she heard the word lawyer from me. Elliot promptly said, "Divorce me. I can't go on with you." He said it firmly. "What? What are you talking about all of a sudden? What did I do?" Diana screamed. "Well, you did. You exploited our dear grandmother." You left your daughter and went on a trip when grandma collapsed. You dumped almost all the housework on her. You left childcare to her too. I said to Diana very calmly, listing the points. But I'm working, aren't I? Isn't it normal for the family to help? But you're not putting your income into the household, are you? You are using it for trips like this one and for your clothes and cosmetics, right? I was speechless when I heard this from Elliot. Why do I have to be told that by you? I never wanted to get married or have children in the first place. Elliot got me pregnant and I had to marry him and have the child. She acted as if she was the victim and not at fault at all. That's when Elliot spoke. I didn't want to talk about this in front of everyone, but you said it was a safe date, didn't you? I didn't really want to hear such a raw story from Elliot, but it seemed Diana had planned the pregnancy. And you said on the phone with your friend. At this age, people around me are nagging, so I thought it would be good to get married and have at least one child. It's a detached house with a garden. He's the eldest son, no mother-in-law, and the sister-in-law is married off. Quite a good property. Usually quiet Elliot said all this at once. Diana turned bright red and yelled, What? You were eavesdropping? It's not eavesdropping when you were talking loudly. Grandma heard it too. You don't care about me or grandma. Only about yourself, so it doesn't matter who hears it, right? Even when Elliot said that, Diana didn't seem to back down. There is no evidence of that. It's impossible for you to unilaterally divorce me. Besides, I'm the mother. You can't separate me from my child. What nerve she has playing the mother card now after leaving childcare entirely to our grandmother? We have evidence, I said, pulling out my mobile phone. It contained videos forwarded from Elliot, showing Diana's daily comments and how she treated our grandmother like a slave. Elliot might be timid, but he must have been trembling with anger inside. When he started thinking about divorce, he thought something might be used as evidence, so he recorded audio and video. With this much evidence, you won't get custody. If you don't agree to the divorce, there's the option of mediation, but you have no chance of winning. Don't forget, we have a lawyer on our side, I said, glancing at my mother's husband, who nodded deeply in silence. Elliot then promptly spread the filled-out divorce papers on the table. The video showed Diana lounging on the sofa watching TV and our grandmother diligently taking care of her great-granddaughter changing her clothes. What is this? What's going on? Don't mess with me. Diana, her face bright red, scribbled and signed the divorce papers, then grabbed her belongings in her room, saying, I am glad to leave this big, shabby house. I'll come back for my stuff later. Don't you dare dispose of it. And left with those parting words. After Diana left, the room was as quiet as if a storm had passed. Thank you all. I will make some coffee now. Everyone came to their senses at our grandmother's words. Grandma, I'll do it. Just sit down, I said, going to the kitchen to boil water. I haven't been in this kitchen for a while, my mother said, helping me with the cookies. Mom, thank you for bringing your husband. Having a lawyer with us was very reassuring, I said, and she replied, Yes, I'm glad I brought him. That daughter-in-law is quite a handful. I may be the bad mother who left this place, but I want you, Elliot, and Grandma to be happy. Really, my mother smiled. As we all sipped coffee and nibbled cookies, our grandmother made a significant announcement. I'm thinking of rebuilding this house. Then maybe Freya and her family will live here. When I left home to get married, my grandmother told me I could always come back. I thought it was a bad omen, but it came true in a different way. A happy way. About a year later, a splendid two-family house was completed. It's a slightly unconventional two-family setup with the first floor completely barrier-free for our grandmother, Elliot, and our niece. The second floor is for my husband, our newly born child, and me. By the way, we had a boy. There's a mini kitchen on the second floor separate from the main kitchen so we can cook simple meals there. There's also a sunroom that feels open even in rainy weather so the children can play without trouble. There are enough rooms for more children in the future, and even if Elliot remarries, we can live comfortably. As a side note, our son was born easily. I wish I could tell Diana, who was boasting about her childbirth. Our grandmother paid for the entire cost of rebuilding. The heads of the household are Elliot and Knox. I wonder if I'm lucky enough to live in such a splendid house and to be the head of the household. Knox initially felt hesitant, but now he's completely settled in, living happily with his grandmother, Elliot, and his niece. Speaking of Diana, who is divorced, her parents' home is a 2-bedroom apartment and they have no room to accommodate their returned daughter, let alone space to store her vast collection of clothes, shoes, and bags. Diana seems to have no choice but to live in a cheap 1-bedroom apartment. Although divorced, she still has the right to visit her daughter. Despite not trying to see her daughter for over 6 months, Diana, having somehow learned about the house renovation, seems to have pressured Elliot for a reconciliation. She's truly a self-centered and shameless person. Of course, Elliot coldly rejected her. I never knew that Grandma was so wealthy. If Diana had known that, her attitude towards our grandmother would have been different, and she would never have agreed to the divorce. My father and late grandfather left it to me. I was thinking of giving it to you while I was alive, but after that daughter-in-law came, I decided to keep the money a secret. The thought that the house and money might have become Diana's sent chills down their spines. I want you and Elliot to be happy. Grandmother had seen through Diana's true nature even while being treated so poorly. But rebuilding the house was my selfish desire. I wanted to spend my remaining years peacefully with my grandchildren and great-grandchildren. Grandmother said, looking a bit apologetic. Stop it, Grandma. They say life lasts 100 years now. You have to stay healthy until the great-grandchildren get married. When I said that, Grandma replied, that sounds delightful, and smiled gently. Seeing her like that, I want her to live surrounded by grandchildren and great-grandchildren peacefully and happily. People like Diana who only think of themselves and can't care for others will live as they please and leave this world alone. It's too late to regret when you're old and have no one around. One day, while thinking about this, I heard the news of a company's bankruptcy. It sounded familiar and it turned out to be Diana's workplace. The first misfortune came sooner than expected. I don't know if Diana will actually lose her job, but surely a life like a rolling stone awaits her. Elliot seems to have a new girlfriend lately. Elliot, don't repeat the same mistake, okay? When I warned him, Elliot retorted, I know, one strong-willed woman like Freya is enough. And everyone laughed. The children, my son and niece, laughed without understanding the meaning. When the adults are smiling, the children smile too.